Ladies and gentlemen, could I have your attention, please? Thank you very much. Welcome to the celebration this evening to mark here, at least in the UK, the full opening of the Basrah Museum. There was an event in Basra in March 2019, but few of you were able to be there at that time, and so further work has now been done on the museum. So tonight we mark the completion of the project and have an opportunity to thank the Cultural Protection Fund, which made a very generous grant in the latter stages of the project. This new museum for Basra, housed in a former palace of Saddam Hussein, has been a long time in the making. The idea was conceived in 2008, warmly supported by Sabani White Spanner, then head of Multinational Forces Southeast in Iraq, by Neil McGregor, then director of the British Museum, by Qatan Al-Abid, the director of Basra Museum, and by the Iraqi authorities. In the early stages, the project manager was Major Hugo Clark, and plans of the building were drawn up by Major Rupert Burridge. As you know, the army left soon thereafter, and in 2010, the Friends of Basrah Museum, under the chairmanship of Sir Terence Clark, came into existence to raise funds for the project. And I'd like now to pay tribute to my fellow trustees who worked so hard to bring this project to fruition. They are Lamia Al-Gailani, who sadly passed away a year ago without seeing the finished museum, Claire Bebbington, Leanne Butcher, Hugo Clark, Alice Walpole, Angela Grimshaw, and Ian McGregor. And I'd also like to thank Peter Hunt of HWH Associates, who's been a tower of strength throughout. Well, initially, a generous grant was made by BP for the restoration of the building and the installation of one gallery, which was devoted to the history of Basra. Other contributions came from Petrofac, IPPD Limited, Pulse Brands, the Charlotte Bonham Carter Fund, and private individuals. Thereafter, the project was in danger of foundering, but the Cultural Protection Fund came to the rescue in December 2016 with a very generous grant. Thank you, Cultural Protection Fund and DCMS. The project coordinator during this last stage of the project has been Joan McKeever, and Joan, I don't think we would have been able to do this without you. Well, what of the future? As you're going to hear, the British Institute for the Study of Iraq has donated its library to the museum to create a resource centre, and the vision for the future is that Basra Museum will be not just a museum for Basra, but a model museum for southern Iraq and even for the wider region. Well, that's enough from me, and you're now going to have talks from Sir Terence Clark, who will be the next up. He's going to introduce His Excellency, the Iraqi Ambassador. Sabani White Spanner will thereafter say a few words, and then Stephen Stenning of the Cultural Protection Fund, and on behalf of BP, Zaid El Yasseri will say something, and lastly, Joan McKeever will wrap up the proceedings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and may I thank you publicly for the huge contribution which you have personally made to this project over more than a decade. John started this off in 2008, and here we are in 2020, and he's still going strong. But I have to say all the trustees on the board have shown an extraordinary devotion to this project to make it a success. And John slid over one or two of the obstacles that faced us along the way. Not least was when we, already working on the project, heard to our horror that the building had been occupied by the Basrah Investment Authority. And for about, well, over a year, we simply had to take time out to until they had found alternative premises. As if that were not enough, we then were hit by the budgetary constraints on the Iraqi side when they were not able to produce the funds which we hoped would enable us to complete the project. And it was then that we had really no alternative but to go it alone with the funds which were so generously subscribed in this country by both corporate and private donors. Without them, this project would not have been possible. And so it was that we were able to open the first gallery, the Basrah Gallery, in September 2016. And shortly before then, we heard the good news of the establishment of the Cultural Protection Fund. And we put in a bid pretty smartly and were one of only 7 applicants to be successful for a sizable tranche of funds with which we were able to go on and complete the other 3 galleries at the museum, which were opened in March last year. Completion is perhaps not the right word to use in the context of this museum, because at each stage we always seem to find something else to do. And you will not be surprised to hear that although the project came formally to an end in March, here we are nearly a year on, and there are still things to do. And I very much hope that the Cultural Protection Fund will continue to look benignly on the FOBM to enable this project, which, when you look at the circumstances in Iraq today, it stands out as a beacon of successful cooperation between the United Kingdom and Iraq. And it is in that context of cooperation between our 2 countries that I would now like to call upon His Excellency Mohammed Ja'far Sadr, the new Iraqi ambassador to the Court of St. James, to say a few words. Your Excellency, tafadhal.
I am sorry, I will speak in Arabic because my English is not very well. Sir Trans, شكرا جزيلا للتقديم. الضيوف الكرام، من دواعي سروري أن أتيحت لي الفرصة للقاء داعمي وأصدقاء متحف البصرة. اسمحوا لي أولا أن أستذكر ببالغ الحزن الدكتورة لمياء الجيلاني، أحد مؤسسي المتحف التي لم تعد معنا اليوم. يمثل متحف البصرة فصلاً جديداً في حماية التراث الثقافي العراقي، وذلك بفضل العمل المتفاني من قبل القائمين عليه والداعمين له، ولا سيما الممول الرئيسي شركة BP والشركات الأخرى التي تعد شريكاً مهماً ليس للمتحف فقط بل للعراق عامة، حيث مولت هذه الشركة عدداً من المشاريع التي دعمت التطور الاقتصادي والثقافي والاجتماعي وساعدت العراقيين بالحفاظ على تاريخهم وحمايته. سيكون متحف البصرة الذي يقع على ضفاف نهر شط العرب الجميل صرحا ثقافيا ليس فقط لجنوب العراق ولكن للمنطقة بأكملها. لدينا مستقبل زاهر ونطمح أن نرى مزيدا من هذه المشاريع في أنحاء العراق من قبل المعهد البريطاني لدراسة العراق والشركات الداعمة، خاصة تلك المناطق التي طالتها الحروب. شكرا لحضوركم ودعمكم المستمر. Thank you.
Thank you, John, very much. I'm Barney White-Spunner. I don't think there's any point in pretending other that the period 2003 to 2008 was a difficult and painful period for Basrah, and also that it was a very difficult period for British and Allied soldiers, troops who were deployed across southern Iraq. I took command of Allied forces in southern Iraq in 2008. And it was clear then, I think to many of us, that the political and military difficulties that we were facing was in danger of obfuscating, obscuring what was a long and valued friendship between the UK and Basrah. And let's not forget, this is a friendship that goes back a very long time. And it was important to us that, as we could see, we were coming to an end of what has probably been one of the most painful and difficult periods, both for Basrah and for the army, for a long time, that it would be very nice for you to have a project, something that actually could mark the period in a more positive, in a more positive manner. The old Basrah Museum, as you've heard, had suffered in 2003. Again, that was very regrettable. It's a sin of omission on the part of the British Army, on the part of the Allied forces. It should have been protected in the same way that other key institutions in Basrah were. It wasn't, and it was wrong. But restoring it, therefore, offered a very logical and positive opportunity. And as the Basraris were very fond of saying to us, actually, we built the first bridge over the Shatt al-Arab together. We built, not the first way, the first bridge that still exists now. We designed the botanical gardens together. So why not do we not now do the museum together? But the inspiration came not from me, it came from three people who are here this evening. My old friend Charles Moore, who, when he and I were talking about how we could try and bring some new energy and direction to the mission in Iraq, suggested that we have lunch with Neil McGregor, who is also here this evening, and with John Curtis. Neil was then director of the British Museum, and John was heading the Middle Eastern department. And over lunch in the British Museum in 2007, we determined to see what we could do. And it was, of course, a three-part project: the museum, a survey of the archaeological sites in Iraq, which John and the international team conducted with the Iraqi authorities to see just what the state of the ancient monuments was, and then training so that we could help the team that would take over the museum itself. My thanks and gratitude to them. It was your inspiration, your idea. My thanks to Hugo Clark, who worked with me, who again is here and you've heard about, who also happens to be my nephew, but there's no nepotism in this. To Katan Al-Habib, who's done so much actually to get the museum going. And to all those who've taken on what was an idea and delivered it. It's very easy to have ideas, isn't it? We can all come up with these great ideas. It takes funding, it takes effort, it takes energy to absolutely deliver them. But I think what sort of has guided me through all this is I have this vision that there will a day will come fairly soon when tourists flock to southern Iraq and they go and look at Basrah, the museum, and in the same way maybe that at once they went to look at the pyramids of Egypt, was after all, we have a comparable antiquity and cultural importance. But thank you all very much indeed.
So, good evening, and first of all, thank you for inviting me to speak. My brief was very clear. It was to be no longer than 3 minutes. So therefore I found the smallest pad I could and restricted myself to 1 page of that pad, so you can be reassured I won't go over my time. My name's Steve Stenning. I'm British Council's Head of Arts and Society, and that includes, rather gloriously, the Cultural Protection Fund. It's been mentioned tonight, and thank you for that. Just a quick explanation. The Cultural Protection Fund is a fund that was first kind of cited, I guess, in response to the events in places like Mosul and Palmyra back in 2015. And then, thanks to the good work of people like Neil McGregor already mentioned, there was a desire to look at how official development assistance might be used to help cultural protection. And the result was a partnership between the British Council and British Government, Department of Culture, Media and Sport, Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport now. And pleased that my colleagues from DCMS are here this evening. 3 things I want to reflect on. One is that with that added imperative that comes from it being a development assistance program, is the idea of not just the importance of heritage per se, but in identifying the benefits and the values that can come from heritage to local people. And the previous speaker, Sabani, mentioned about friendship, the idea of friendship between Iraq and the UK, and I think it encourages that because there is then a need to look at the impact and the benefit that comes from work to local people and be able to evidence that and therefore work with local organisations. Secondly, it was mentioned that it's something of a beacon was the word that was used, and it strikes me that way from our point of view as well. The history of this particular building, a building that has been the focus of military action as well, has had a long and not always glorious history, but was also an empty building at one point that should have been a museum, and is now a museum again, and we're celebrating the fact that it's a museum and a library. And finally, the Cultural Protection Fund has 51 projects throughout the 12 countries that it works in. Iraq is one of those 12 countries. This project is one of those 51. As Joan knows as well, it's one of those projects that has come under probably more scrutiny than others. And there's something joyous about people, saying, is that a wise thing to be doing? There are risks attached to that. Let me tell you, that won't happen. And it's quite joyous that some of the things that specifically people said won't happen have happened. Artifacts held in Baghdad have been moved back to Basra. There is a museum. So there is also a kind of a joy in that sense of you create the cooperation that looks at what is possible, you believe in that, provide some funding, and glorious things happen. So finally, I'd just like to thank John Curtis and Joan particularly for being wonderful grantees, putting such energy into this, and always be willing to share what's going on and answer any sometimes bureaucratic questions that might come up through a fund like ours. So thank you, and it's glorious to be here, and congratulations for all your many achievements.
Good evening. Very proud to be here among all the people who have worked hard to complete this project. Really honored to be here today. I actually wanted to thank all the efforts that has been put into this project, all the stakeholders. I think it's about time for Iraqis and the young generation, after 3 decades of calamities that Iraq has gone through, It's actually about time for the young generation to appreciate the history that they have, that last sort of go back into the sort of the first civilization in the world. Very proud to be part of this team. BP will continue to be a key contributor to Iraq's economy through our responsibility to turn Rumaila, which is the largest oil field in Iraq, to be a world-class oil field, to work on people's capability to build the future of young Iraqis who will hopefully manage to manage the field going forward after the completion of the project, and also to work with the community in Iraq. And let's not forget our contribution and commitment to maintain and preserve the history of Iraq through the work that's been done at the museum. And let's not forget, BP has got a long-lasting history with Iraq, and that was through the first discovery of the oil field in Kirkuk in 1927, followed by, in the south, the Zubair oil field and Rumaila, which is what we operate at the moment. That contributes towards almost like 40% of Iraq's economy and contributes to the federal budget. And so far, Iraq's economy has been benefited through the operation of Rumaila since we entered Iraq in 2009. So great honor. Obviously, Ian is not here today. He's been a key contributor, and many thanks. And our commitment will continue to be with the team over here and also the Iraqi authorities to preserve places like those. Thank you.
Well, at least on this one you can see me. Sometimes you can't. So thank you very much for attending this evening. It's a very special event, as you've already heard. I actually want to point out, I'm speaking on behalf of the British Institute for the Study of Iraq. I am the vice chair. And Dr. Paul Collins, I would like him to at least put his hand up so everybody knows who he is, because he's not only the chair, but he's also been very involved in this project. You've heard about how wonderful this celebration is. This is a celebration. When John asked me over 3 years ago to be involved, I confess I did not think it'd be quite so involved, but that's okay. We all talk about commitment, and I can't regret this commitment. This has been one of the best projects to be involved with ever. I will go to my grave knowing that I helped on the Basrah Museum project. But also working with this set of trustees who have all been dedicated for over a dozen years. Many of the people in this room have already, we already know how much they've done. It has been amazing. 3 years ago, there was a conference that was held just over 3 years ago after the opening of the first gallery. We call this the first phase when you try and sort of have it separated. And that conference proceedings have just come out, and I urge you all to buy a hot copy downstairs on your way out, because not only will it give you the history of how this project started. John Curtis has a very wonderful article. Professor Eleanor Robson has done an incredible introduction bringing together the papers. And it also shows that Iraqis are involved with an international community, and this is what we're all about. So the book of the proceedings does show many of these things, but tonight really is principally to thank the British Council and the Cultural Protection Fund and DCMS for this funding. I mean, I actually call this a transformative grant. Without this grant, this project never could have happened. I'm sorry, fundraising is not the fort of my trustees. And if you want to help us on that, that's a different story. So with the photos, you can see it's a very rich, beautiful site. This is a thing of beauty in Basra. And those of you who've been to Basra know that there are not many things of beauty in Basra right now. When you see young Iraqis there walking around, looking at the things, seeing families, people bringing things, I wish it was a free museum. It is not a free museum. Maybe that's something that other people can work on with the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage. So this project has also been possible thanks to the assistance of the Iraqi embassy and former Iraqi ambassadors who have enabled us to go to Iraq. As you know, that's not always the easiest thing to do. And without the help and assistance that we have had, we never could have done this project. We know that. So obviously the trustees have been working tirelessly throughout. I have to say specific thanks in memory of Dr. Lamia Al-Gailani Ware, who not only was a trustee of the Friends of Basrah Museum, but she was an honorary life member of the British Institute for the Study of Iraq. None of us would be here in this room if she had not been involved in this project. Those objects that came from Baghdad came because Lamia worked with Katan al-Abid, and they went into the basement and they got excited for the objects that they were able to bring. I would say that it probably was a challenge, and her daughter Noura is here and got a bit cross about how she was treated sometimes, but in the end, when she died, the work that was done in her honor by the people in the museum. They made sure that those objects got down to Basra in time for the opening, which we have to admit, despite what Stephen says, we're a little anxious about. So the Cultural Protection Fund and the British Council have been flexible. You need to be flexible in Iraq. You can't just sort of expect that everything's going to be ticked off and this is your box. And when the Basra Provincial Council did not come up with the money to do the renovations, we went to our grant manager and she went to the fund and they gave an uplift grant, which produced these absolutely beautiful, stunning rooms. Then we went to them when they said, you can do an extension to your grant or you can apply. I mean, there's no guarantee. And this was at the end, and I thought, phew, I'm almost finished. But then I thought, aha, the library. Lamia said to me, I said to Lamia, is a library something that should happen? And she said, yes, a library must happen. This is going to be a research library, but also a library for people from Basra to explore their heritage. Right now, you see on the left, on this side, what the library looks like. It doesn't have any books. The books are right now at the British Embassy in Baghdad, waiting to be sorted, hopefully with the help of the British Council, and our trustee, Alice Walpole, is willing to get in there with a team of people to go and help. Eleanor Robson has put together the wonderful list that we're all going by, but we really don't know what we have. So some of you here are thinking of donating libraries, and we hope that maybe some of those libraries will end up in Basra. I will come at the very end to my closing remarks are something really very important. Lamia was involved not only with, obviously, Friends of Basrah Museum, but also the BUSY, and we have a major visiting Iraqi scholarship program that the last ones the BUSY sponsored was generously sponsored by David Dangour, who he is tonight. But also then we have to thank Professor Eleanor Robson because she created the Nahrain Network that has funded already 7 scholars who've come here, and there are at least 3 or 4 more in the pipeline. I can't quite remember. And we have a meeting at the end of the week for the last, end of the month for the last grants. So without her program, we would have also struggled. And those programs, bringing Iraqis here, having them go back and work with their colleagues, really is what it's all about. So right now, the other person to mention, who's been mentioned, is Katan al-Abid. I will honestly say that I could not have done the work without him, nor could the other trustees. We would not be here. This museum would not be here without Katan. Due to changes in the Iraqi structure, he has stepped away from active involvement with the Basra Museum, but he is still the director of Antiquities and Heritage for Basra. And just 2 weeks ago, the Basra Provincial Council has awarded a $2 million grant to complete all the work that was originally part of the work that all of you started 10 years ago. So that work is also going to be finished. The library, I mean, I would say it is a bit of a miracle that the library has been pulled together. I'm going to actually thank my daughter, because she actually did 60 hours of work on the design phase. And if you look downstairs at the bulletin, you will see she actually, without her help, I don't think I would have finished this phase of the project. But really, in conclusion, the thing that is key to this project is working with the Iraqis, and we had to do some quick changes, because as you know, things have been very challenging and difficult in Iraq. And we went to the international community for the Library Management Services project for an open source thing called Koha. Nobody replied. I went to one company in Abu Dhabi. It was too expensive. I know that. I can't pull that one off. And then through other connections, through the American Center of Oriental Research in Amman, Jordan, it's been also a partner, I was put in touch with the head of the Karbala University Library System, who came up almost immediately with an incredible program. We consulted with our grant manager at the time, Katrina Jackson, and we were able to implement this. If that program had not come to fruition, I would say that maybe this year would not have been so successful. They've just completed last week their program, delivered by two outstanding Iraqi scholars and librarians. And after all, the first libraries were in Iraq, so wouldn't that make sense that they're the ones delivering it? They delivered it to 10 people from both volunteers and Basrah Museum staff, including the first woman, formal staff member of the Basrah Museum. That made me very happy. And so when that finished, which was just literally last Thursday, Dr. Umaima, and there's a little bit of a thing downstairs about it all, she wrote to me, and I want to share these words. As an Iraqi citizen, I thank the donor and thank you all for the efforts that are being made to support Iraq in these circumstances. So we also thank all of you here for your interest in our project, your past and future support to both these charities, because we are charities, by the way, devoted to Iraq and its cultural heritage. And we hope that you will continue your involvement with us, and we thank you for coming tonight, and enjoy the rest of the evening. That was more than 3 minutes, sorry. Oh, don't forget the book.